You are listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 238. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Here's a question for you. How would you define yourself as a leader? If you had to narrow it down to just a handful of words, what are some of the characteristics that you would use to describe you in your identity as leader? Now, whether you are a leader in title or a leader in other respects, you don't need a title to be a leader. At work, outside of work, chances are when you start to look around, you'll see areas where you're leading. And when you ask yourself who you are in that role, it can be really revealing. Now, maybe you've already thought about this question. And when I asked it earlier, a number of descriptors came to mind. For example, maybe you see yourself as a fair leader, a structured leader, a leader who has a vision and brings others along with them. That might have been your response. Or maybe you've never really thought about that question and you're still thinking about that question. And if that's the case, then you are 100% in the right place because we are going to dive deeper into that exercise in today's podcast episode. Now, if you already have a sense of who you are as a leader, again, welcome, and I'm thrilled to have you here. This is going to be relevant to you as well because this is an opportunity to challenge and explore how you conceive of yourself and how you might conceive of what is possible for you in the future. Now, before we dive into the substance of today's episode, I would love to share with you some opportunities for us to connect and work together. Now, the first of those is a workshop that is coming up in just a couple of days. If you're listening at the time that this recording is going live, so that would be December 10th, 2025, then in just 2 days, December 12th, that's a Friday, at noon Pacific time, I will be hosting a free webinar where you will dive deeper into leading yourself through change in 2026. And what we'll do there is we're going to dive deeper into this concept of you as leader, your identity as a leader. And in particular, I'm going to ask you to identify 3 components of you as leader at different stages of a change cycle. So if you're intrigued, then by all means, join me. The information to register will be with the show notes that go along with this episode. And if you can't find the registration information, no problem. Send me a note, send me an email, send me a message on LinkedIn. I will send you the information that you need so that you can join for that workshop. Now, another opportunity that you and I have to work together and develop your identity as a leader is in a group program that I'm offering in January. This is a 6-month group coaching and mastermind program for women lawyers who want to develop some aspect of their leadership skills. Now, leadership, in my view, and you'll hear more about this, isn't necessarily that you are taking on a specific title. It is that you are first and foremost leading yourself with greater intention. And the way that I propose to do that is to help you set a goal, one that requires you to stretch a little, one that requires you to take on the identity of leader as you envision it, and then go through a series of stages that ultimately build you to that place. So you'll start by setting that goal, and then you move into self-concept. So what does that mean for you? Who do you need to be? If the goal sets out the how you need to get there, then the identity work is who you need to be in order to achieve it, who you need to become over the process of working toward your goal. We talk about obstacles. So at each stage of a process where you're working towards something that you've never built before, chances are you're going to encounter obstacles. And the obstacles that you encounter are specific to you. You've probably noticed that certain things that you find challenging, your friends, your colleagues, they don't necessarily have trouble with. and vice versa, right? You'll think about the things that people come to you for. You might think, how is it possible that so-and-so finds this hard? I find it so easy. For them, it's an obstacle. For you, it isn't. And why is that? It's because we are all different. So as you're embodying, embracing, developing your sense of who you are as a leader, you might encounter challenges that are unique to you, and we get to identify what those are and help you overcome them. And in doing so, you are evolving that identity of who you are as leader. You're developing skills. If you think about a chef, for example, I always like to think of cooking examples. And if the goal is to build or bake, I should say, a world-class chocolate cake, and you've never baked a cake before, the person that you are today is not the same person that you will be after you learn how to bake the cake. And chances are it's not because somebody hands you a recipe with no instructions and you just go to town and you do it. Chances are there's some trial and error, there's some obstacles along the way, and the person that you become at the end of it, that is the person who has the world-class cake. That person is different from who you are today. So we talk about obstacles, we talk about confidence and authority and building those, what it looks like, what it means, how to do that so that as a leader, you have that sense of confidence, even when you're facing uncertainty, even when you're leading into an environment or a situation or solving a problem that you have not yet solved, right? You're stepping into the unknown. And developing that sense of confidence within yourself is what will allow you to lead with courage, to lead with authority, to lead in a way where you have that sense of self-trust, even when the outcome itself may not be guaranteed. Then we talk about boundaries, we talk about delegation and what that looks like with you as leader. When you have decided what matters and what doesn't, when you have decided what requires your attention and what can be done by somebody else, then we start to think about how that plays out in terms of what you say yes and say no to, and what you choose to delegate to others, including members of the team that you may be leading. And then finally, we talk about sustainable growth. And this is where you get to think about the longer term. And every stage of your practice is going to look different, right? If you think about your career unfolding in terms of chapters, and maybe at the beginning of every chapter, your character in Form A, and at the end of the chapter, it's like you've had a lesson, you've had an experience, you're a different person. By the end of that chapter, you're person B. That is really that character development. And I hope you have that. I hope that your career is interesting and engaging and fulfilling and that there is growth, in which case we can expect that there's going to be this ongoing evolution, this ongoing growth, and we want that to feel sustainable. So those are the themes that you can expect for us to work through when you join me in the Mastermind program. If you choose to join, you would be among a group of women lawyers, so a group of up to 8. We also cover transitions. We also cover time management in a way that speaks uniquely to the group. And if you are interested in doing this type of work, but maybe you miss the window or you want to do it more in a one-to-one capacity versus in a group, then we can do that too. Just let me know and we can structure a individualized coaching program for you that is based on these same themes. So with that, let's dive into today's episode where we're going to orient ourselves. I will orient you in a piece of foundational learning that I think will help you as you decide who you want to be as a leader. And in the title of this episode, I talk about reverse designing, reverse engineering who you are as a leader, your leader identity. And the reason that I chose that language is because it's an opportunity. If you're thinking about yourself as a leader, you have an opportunity to decide who you want to be and then work your way backwards to create a plan to get there. And what I'm sharing with you today is highly relevant because it really is a step-by-step in terms of the level of depth that you can go when learning a new skill, here the skill being leadership. So what I'd love to share with you is a process, and it is called the triple loop learning process. And it's a concept that was coined by Chris Argyris and Donald Shawn in the late 1970s. And it's basically 3 layers of learning. Now, before I dive into that, I'd just like to give you a bit of context in terms of how this came on my radar recently. And I was having a coaching conversation with a lawyer that I've been working with, and the lawyer asked me probably one of the most, I would say, rewarding questions that I've been asked in a while. And the question was this. We were working on a particular skill, one that currently is not a default skill, but in the future will be. And the question was, at what point does that just become second nature? And that's probably a question that you've asked yourself as well, right? If you've ever tried to change a habit, right? You've probably heard 21 days to make or break a habit. Or maybe you've tried to change a certain behavior. You've wanted to start running in the morning, or you want to stop getting stressed when you see somebody's name show up in your inbox, or something where you know that right now my default, for example, is ooh, I've been scrolling at night. This is a habit that I seem to be flirting with on an ongoing basis where I know I want to go to bed. And then there's this little Instagram icon on my phone. I'm like, oh, I just want to see a few reels. It's so relaxing. And next thing you know, it's not just 5 minutes, it's 20 minutes. And those were 20 minutes I could have been spending sleeping. So right now, unfortunately, that's a bit of a default habit of mine. And the question is, when I choose to change that, at what point will it just become second nature? At what point will I not even think to look at my phone? And for you, if you're thinking about shifting strategies, shifting behaviors, at what point does that become second nature? So the question itself is one that we probably ask ourselves quite often, but the beauty of it, the reason I got so excited to share it with you is that what it does is that it addresses 3 different layers of behavior, each of which is more successive. And the final layer, that third stage, is really where that default conditioning switches. And the answer to the question of when it happens, that of course depends. But you'll know that it happens in a moment. I remember this happened with me a few years ago. I don't drink very often. Sometimes I do. And I've gone through stages, particularly when I was younger and I had more free time. And it was more of a social thing where I would be more inclined to go out for drinks or have a glass of wine with dinner or whatever it might be. And at some point, I guess I just decided that was not compatible with my lifestyle. I have kids and they don't let me sleep in. And so if I'm up early and I've had a glass of wine or maybe 2, I don't feel as good. So at some point along the road, I just kind of phased it out. It's not intentional. It's probably not permanent. It's not a big mission or anything like that, but that's where things are at right now. And I remember being out to dinner and having a glass of wine in front of me. And normally upon maybe leaving for dinner, my instinct would be to drink the glass of wine, whatever was remaining, if there was, I don't know, a third of a glass or a few sips left. Whereas I noticed in this moment that I just decided to leave it. I'm like, oh, I don't really want it, and I'm just going to leave it there. To me, that was a point in time where I noticed the shift, right? If you're trying to change a different type of behavior, you might notice the same thing. It's like that time you sort of notice yourself doing something differently without actually even thinking about it. So going back to this triple loop learning example, what that might mean, what that might look like is as a leader, as you're defining yourself as leader, as you're reverse designing, you may have aspirational goals right now where you think the way I want to be, the person I want to be as a leader is not where I am right now. Maybe right now, your leadership style is perhaps not as patient as you want it to be, or maybe it's too patient and you want to have more boundaries in place. And so the difference for you would be a shift in terms of where you draw your boundaries or how much leeway you give. And you'll know that the shift has happened when something that previously would have created response A in you, whether it's saying yes when you don't want to, or maybe you say something you later regret, that in that new identity state, you no longer have that reflex and you notice that. So single loop, double loop, triple loop learning is a really nice frame for you to think about your leadership style. And I'll walk through each of these layers and give you an example. And as I do that, I would love for you to think about you as leader and what this looks like in your world. So if we start with the single loop, it's really that action-oriented layer. It's important. It really is important. One of the main reasons action is important is that is how you're interfacing with the world. When you speak to somebody and you use verbal and nonverbal language, right? If your arms are crossed and you look angry, then they're receiving something from you. They're receiving a message from you. They're taking that in. If you use words that are really kind, they're taking that in. If you're using words that are not so kind, they're taking that in. So your actions are the visible portion to the external world of what you're actually doing. If you're actually doing your work. You're writing your emails, you're doing your research. That action is reflected in terms of what you're producing. So actions are important. And the way that you can think about them here is the tip of the iceberg analogy, which is not at all original, but we can all relate to that when you think of an iceberg, chances are you've seen the image of that tip of the iceberg that is emerged, right? It peeks out from beneath the water's surface or above the water's surface, and you know, or you can see if you're looking at a picture, that underneath that tip of the iceberg, there's this very large, proportionally very large iceberg bottom, whatever you want to call it, the core, the heart of the iceberg beneath the surface. So if you're observing the iceberg from above sea level, what you see is the tip, but we know that underneath there's a lot more going on. So when you're thinking about triple loop learning, that first single loop is what is going on at the tip of the iceberg. So that's what people see, but we know it's driven by a lot more than that. And this really materializes in the how. And a question that is associated with this single loop layer is, am I doing it right? So let's say, for example, you're giving feedback to somebody and you say, you did that wrong. Somebody might come along to you and say, hey, listen, when you're giving feedback, you don't want to tell somebody they did that wrong. You want to say, I noticed that you didn't submit this brief with the headings in place. I don't know, I'm making up an example. And that signals to the person that there was an error, but you're saying it in a way that isn't necessarily, you did that wrong. As a parent, I have learned that when you give, we'll call it hard feedback to a kid, when you're disciplining your child, whatever that means to you, when you're trying to correct behavior, then what you are encouraged to say is that thing that you did was not acceptable. It is not acceptable to hit your sister. It is not acceptable to throw your vegetables on the ground and break the glass container. It is not acceptable to do a specific thing. But what you are not to say is you are not acceptable. You are not acceptable for hitting your sister. You are not acceptable for throwing your vegetables on the ground and making a mess. There's a distinction there, right? There is a how-to. There is a way that some people will objectively say you did it right and objectively say you did it wrong. So in that first layer then, when you're thinking about you as leader, what are some of the behavior strategies, the surface level actions that you take as a leader? And the issue here with single loop learning is the what. Not even the what, really, it's the how, right? What is the recipe for doing it right? And when you're in that framework, right, when you're thinking about single loop learning, you're not really questioning why. You're not necessarily tying the explanation to a deeper reason. You're basically accepting at face value that this is the way to do it. And so you follow that. That is the single loop. And there's a time and a place for this. There's actually a lot of time and place for this, especially when the thing that you're trying to do maybe just isn't something that you've ever done before. It's new to you. It's out of your routine. You actually don't know how to do it. The first time you bake a cake, chances are you want a recipe to follow. And yes, maybe down the road you start to tweak, you start to personalize it, you start to customize it. The first time you delegate, maybe you do want someone just to give you a step-by-step instruction. And as you delegate more, you start to customize it to yourself, to the people that you're delegating to. But it's really that starting point is that surface level, what you need to do. So from there, you move into double loop learning. So double loop learning, as you can probably guess, is this idea of going deeper than actions. It's not just how do I do this, but looking at the thoughts, the beliefs, the assumptions that are meaningful in relation to the action. So another way of looking at this might be the what, like what is important about this? What does this thing mean? What role does this play in the bigger picture? It might be the why. Why is this important? Why do I need to do this? And the question that corresponds to double loop learning is, am I doing the right thing? So we're not just asking ourselves, am I doing it right? Did I send the email and make everything correct? but am I doing the right thing in sending that email in the first place? Does it align with the greater objectives? So if you're thinking about this from a leadership perspective, what you might be saying there is, okay, as a leader, maybe the surface level is the action or the words that I'm using. Here, we might be seeing how that instruction, how that delegation fits into the bigger picture and some of the beliefs or the thoughts that you have in relation to your job as leader and the person who you're leading, their job. And you'll notice this when you start to question and raise awareness about how you might be thinking about a given situation. So for example, if you are delegating a project to another lawyer, if you're delegating a project to an assistant, if you're delegating something to somebody, and you're thinking as you're explaining, this isn't my job to delegate, or this is going to take forever, I'm better off doing it myself, or you're thinking something like, it goes without saying that I shouldn't have to explain this. You can see how that unconscious, but bringing it to the conscious, right? If you start to really question, and there's ways to do that, but if you start to notice what you're thinking and how it's influencing the actions that you're taking, if you think to yourself, I shouldn't have to explain this again, chances are you're feeling a little bit impatient with that person, and that might show up in the way that you speak with them, right? If you're trying to delegate and meanwhile you're thinking, I don't want to burden them, this is going to be so painful, then you might notice that you're shying away from it. Maybe you're not asking for what you really need. You're only asking for a part of it. Maybe you're not giving them the full breadth of instruction that would make this more meaningful. So I'm offering these as examples, and for you, it will be different. You'll have your own go-to thoughts. You'll have your own go-to beliefs that are at a semi-conscious level, we'll say, driving your actions. So that double loop learning, again, going back to that question, am I doing the right thing? There's a greater level of awareness here, and you can really challenge yourself to raise your awareness, your conscious/unconscious beliefs. We're under the water's surface now. So this does require a little bit of thinking. And what you'll notice that there are patterns that you've adopted, whether or not you've done this consciously, thoughts, assumptions that you have made that are driving your actions. So double loop learning, and for my intents and purposes as your coach, double loop learning is when we start to raise that awareness so that you're now consciously taking actions that are aligning with a certain action. So, for example, if your typical sort of default way of thinking so far has been, well, I don't want to inconvenience somebody, right? I don't want to inconvenience them by asking them to work on a weekend. And so instead you do the work yourself, but then you're resentful. And the person to whom you might have delegated or the team that you might have delegated to, they don't learn. You still have to do the work. And maybe that increases your level of resentment. Maybe you don't delegate and it becomes harder to delegate. And so you can see the spiral. I don't want to kind of go down the rabbit hole here. But the idea here is that you can actually challenge those thoughts. And if you're able to see the situation differently, if something else resonates with you, like this is a great opportunity for them to learn. Yes, it's going to cost them some time on the weekend, but in exchange, they're actually going to get involved in a really cool file. And this is a great way for them to start taking the steps they need to get to the work that they really want to do, which is what's going to follow this initial step. So just by even reframing it, you've started to see it differently, and that's going to lead to a different set of actions. So that is your double loop learning. Now, that brings us to triple loop. And this is where we're getting at more than that sort of conscious, semi-conscious. This is where we go really deep. And this is kind of hard to explain. And the best way for me to really think about this is that when something is ingrained to the point that it is no longer conscious, but it's more than just this, the double loop, right? There might be thoughts that you have that are unconscious, where once you raise them to consciousness, you question them and you think, actually, that doesn't really apply to me. I sort of just was thinking that because other people told me that I should do that. But now that I'm really thinking about it, I can part with that. I don't need that. And I can see it differently. When you get to that really core triple loop learning, it is an identity. And so if you're thinking about yourself as a leader and who you are as a leader, what that means is that you have decided on who you are and your thoughts and your actions emanate from that core. So if you think about that iceberg analogy, and let's say it's 95% underwater and 5% surface, or above the surface, if you get really grounded in that core piece, that identity piece, then the actions that flow from that core identity are aligned with who you are. And what I have noticed is that when your intentions come from that place, when you're really, really grounded, that is when it becomes a lot easier for you to have the conversations, to take the steps that are necessary. And you're not second guessing yourself so much. You're not wondering what the correct way is to say it according to the experts, whoever the experts may be. Instead, what you're doing is you're making those decisions from a very grounded place, solid in who you are. So, for example, if you think of yourself as a leader, and part of your identity as a leader is, I am a safe person for my team to turn to. I am a person who believes in fostering the development of their team. I am a person who believes in doing what is right, and I do right as long as I am capable of doing that. And I say that because sometimes we will make mistakes. Sometimes you are not going to do the right thing. And it's not coming from a place of ill intention. It is just an oversight. You're moving too fast or something else has happened. And so even when you have this core identity, yes, there is room for error. But the idea here is that you are grounded in who you are. So those identity pieces, the way you see yourself, the leader that you are, that is ultimately what is going to shape the way you think, the way you perceive a situation, and ultimately how you communicate that or how you act in the external world. So again, going back to this idea that you believe that you are a safe space for somebody on your team, then the action that follows from that is going to align with that. So an example of this is a lawyer that I met years ago who told me that she had been nominated and received mentorship awards year after year at her organization. And I asked her about that. And she said, when somebody comes to me, when a junior lawyer comes to me and there's been a problem, there's been a mistake or something's gone wrong, and I know this is potentially a difficult conversation, this is potentially a difficult problem to solve, I go into that conversation with the long-term relationship in mind. I view that person as a member of the team in the long run. So as a mentor, right, if we look at that identity as mentor, that component of her leadership, her as leader, there's a mentoring, nurturing, supportive, there's a long-term view taking perspective, all of which emanate from how she sees herself as a leader, as a mentor. So for you, when you think about that identity that you are taking on, then how does that shape the conversation? If you go into a conversation with a junior lawyer or an assistant that you work with or a colleague, and that person has really dropped the ball, and you're thinking that this is not working, that this person never should have made that mistake. How could this have happened? This is terrible. And that's the perspective that predominates in that conversation. You're not necessarily wrong. Maybe some of these things are true. Maybe they shouldn't have dropped the ball. Maybe this is a really big problem. But what if we also take a step back and say, who do you want to be in that moment? Who do you want to be in that conversation? Maybe the who is, I want to give this person the space that they feel like they can actually tell me what is going on here so that we can fix the problem. I want to support this person because they may have made an error here, but I've been working with them for the last 5 years and this is pretty out of character. So you get to come into that conversation from a different mindset. You might see your role as helping them, nurturing them, mentoring them, helping them get through something tricky, helping them learn and grow. So the way you see yourself, the way you see your role as leader has an impact, and it's coming from a really profound place. And so if you're shifting that, going back to that triple loop learning, it is possible for you to shift. It is possible for you to change. And that change comes from understanding the change that you're trying to make. I mean, sometimes it'll happen inadvertently. You won't necessarily set out to make a change, but life will throw you it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. Life will throw you a curveball that requires you to change the person that you are in order to make it work, in order to thrive, in order for the people that you care about to thrive. So it may happen inadvertently. It may happen because you choose it. It may happen because you choose to define yourself, reverse engineer who you want to be as leader, and then you step into creating that identity. You reverse engineer. And if you want to do that, if you want want to redesign or re-engineer or reverse design who you are as a leader, there is a path here. If you think about single, double, triple loop learning, you now have a pathway. You decide who you want to be at that deep layer, that third level. You define those characteristics, and then you can ask yourself, what does that person think? How might that be different from the way that I'm currently thinking? You might then think, how does that person act in the world? What are they saying? What are they doing? How are their actions different? And when you can really examine and explore, then you can start to adopt pieces. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Maybe it does. Maybe you're in a situation where the motivation and the circumstances are such that you have an instant transformation. It does happen. But if not, how can you set the groundwork for yourself through actions, through the way you're thinking, until you reach that point where that shift happens? And you will know that that foundational triple loop learning shift has happened when you notice that your default reaction, your default response is no longer what it used to be. Instead, it's aligned with the leader that you want to be, the leader that you want to become. So if you think about that expression, dressed for the job you want versus the job you have, this is kind of the same idea, but at a much more personal level, right? This is an identity shaping level. And when you shape that identity, when you understand who you are currently at that core level, and maybe you're fine. Maybe you do this work and you realize, you know what, like who I am is actually great. And all I really need to do is tinker a little bit with some maybe misunderstandings, some incorrect assumptions. Maybe you just need to tinker a bit with the actions. It's entirely possible that you are there. And believe me, there's a lot of coaching that I do that addresses that, where you have everything in place, but there's something in the execution that isn't working. We can always address that, right? Sometimes that's all you need. It's a few tweaks here and there, and you've got what you need. But sometimes it's deeper than that. And if that's the case, if what you're trying to achieve is beyond where you are right now, where you need to become a different type of person, where you need to become a leader at a different level than where you are now, that's where this work really comes into play. And so when you ask me, how long is this going to take? I am excited for you because it shows me that you're interested in something that is beyond your current capacity, something that is going to require that intentional creation. And to me, that is so exciting, especially when it's something that you want. It's something that aligns with a goal that is meaningful and important and impactful for you, because that process, that journey, that learning how to bake the cake, as it were, that's where you develop the skills. That's where you develop the muscle. That's where you have the most interesting growth. And that's where, on the other side of it, in your new identity as leader, you are leading at an entirely different level, at an entirely different capacity. So that is what I have to share with you today, is this 3-step model, this single, double, and triple loop learning. And we're talking about it in the context of leadership. If you want to take it deeper, join me on Friday, December 12th. We're going to dive deep at noon Pacific time. I'm going to walk you through how this would apply at 3 different stages of a change. So come join me. I'd love to have you. It'll be a workshop. You will be working, you'll be thinking, you'll be applying this specifically to yourself. That's an opportunity for us to work together. There's, of course, the 6-month mastermind program. If you are a woman lawyer and you want to work alongside other women lawyers and you love that idea of being in a group, and there's so much that happens within a group dynamic that is just magic. It is something that if you've never done it before and you're interested, I would encourage you to give it some serious thought. Reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to speak with you about it. I have just recently joined a group coaching container, a new one, and I'm loving it. And there's a certain sense of rhythm and accountability that comes along with being witnessed by more than a coach. I mean, a coach alone is already a very significant and motivating factor when it comes to growth and accountability. And when you see yourself in others, when you're hearing another person who is in the same position as you or very similar speak about a particular challenge and how they are dealing with it, there's a level of objectivity that you have because it's not you that is immediately in the problem. So you can actually see it. You learn so much about yourself. There's a sense of validation that, oh, okay, this really amazing, cool, successful person is thinking this, is saying that, they're having those challenges too. It is 100% validating. It is inspiring. And so if you've never done that before, if you've done it and you want to do it again, this is the place for you. And so please do reach out to me. Please let me know if you have any questions about that so I can help you with that. That would be 6 months from January to June 2026, end of June. And then finally, if you're interested in doing this work and maybe you're not able to join in a group environment, but you'd love to do this one-on-one, then I'm so here for you. I would love to take you through this. So with that, I am going to send you off for the week. It's been amazing connecting with you. Thank you for joining me. And I look forward to reconnecting with you on the podcast next week. And of course, feel free to reach out anytime. I would love to hear from you. And, I think this is just such an exciting time of year. We've got big goals ahead. We've got, really great opportunities ahead. And I would love to support you with whatever it is that you want to see happen in 2026. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and look forward to connecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.